Welcome back. Today we're going to take a quick look at the Shozy P20. And for those of you who have looked at this one before, you know, even without picking it up, this one has a really cool design cut into the faceplate, or maybe the faceplate was printed with the design. I'm not sure how they got it in. It almost looks like there's machine lines running through it as well. But yeah, very cool faceplate. I mean, all black design. You don't see this style every day. It's pretty cool. It's nice to see something different once in a while, and I think they hit the mark on difference on that on the shell itself. It is a little bit bigger because this is a 14.5 millimeter dynamic driver. So if we hook it up, or place it next to tin hi-fi, you can kind of see it's not all that much bigger than a normal shell that you might be used to. It's definitely got a little width to it on the faceplate that will appear a little bit wider, but the rest of it is not all that far from what you're typically used to. The cable is a little thinner than maybe you're used to, and I think the most fascinating thing about the cable is this terminal, the termination, the 3.5 millimeter. That is really, really small. And if we look at it next to, I guess, my SimGo cable, you can sort of see the Shozy one is actually a really tiny connector, which is actually pretty cool. You definitely don't see that every day. And I thought it was kind of cool that they actually went through and did it. The rest of the cable, it's kind of thin and light, and I guess that was the motif with going with that. So pretty cool. You know, it's always nice to see something different every once in a while. So there's a box, there's kind of an outer box, there's an inner box which has nothing in it other than this leather-ish case, which doesn't have much in it other than some kind of generic silicone tips. So let's kind of jump into it. And again, as I said, what's really special here with this guy, other than the cutout on the faceplate, is the 14.5 millimeter dynamic driver. On Linsoul, they list it as PET. It's also listed at $140. I think it's $139 on Linsoul. So up there in price. You know, anytime you go above $100 on a single dynamic driver, I tend to take notice. So, and I think what people really want to know is they put a giant dynamic driver inside of it. Is it a base head amount of boom? And I'll say no. I think the graph, and we'll look at it in a second, it's actually quite conservative on the base level. Definitely not what I was expecting. I was expecting a little bit more boom to it, but it's got a really nice base level. I can't really complain about it. It's definitely more of a balanced style tuning. But before we really jump into it, let me get a couple annoyances out of the way. So the bump in the upper treble, and that is real. And let's take a quick look at the graph. So this is the P20 in red, and I kind of put Olina just to give you a feel for maybe what more common levels are on the bass, mid-bass, and then the kind of pinna area, and where Shozy lies against that. So as I said, bass level, Shozy is actually bumped out a little bit over Olina. It's got a little bit more mid-bass to it. Then it goes through pinna area, and it's actually kind of lower here, and then dips, so it's actually less energy there. But then there's a bump that's way out here, and that is a real thing. And maybe you are treble sensitive to that particular spot. I tend to be a little bit more sensitive to that spot when it's at that level. And yeah, I will say that is real, and it's going to do unknown things to your brain. If your ears can hear it and your brain can process it, it's going to do some strange things in your ear. To me, it affected, I think I said balance and stage. So it sounds a bit brighter because there's a lot of energy way out there in the upper treble. Stage, I lost the height. You know, it's sort of something I didn't expect. You're kind of expecting they put a huge bump out there. It's going to sound really huge. It actually sounds very wide, but it actually sounds very short. All the height was missing. The silicone tips that they included, not a good pairing either. So I did kind of fix that with foam tips, and if you have filters, you could try that if it really bothers you. It bothered me quite a bit. And if you ever notice measurements that this one isn't foam tips, but foam tips tend to bring this whole area down a bit, and that's exactly what happens. It sort of gets rid of the noise. Like a lot of whenever you see bumps, and I complain about it with KZ, so I'll complain about it here, but when brands tend to put a lot of energy way out there, it tends to sound like high frequency noise, and it tends to filter back and sound a little bit sibilant. it has a lot of side effects with not really all that many benefits. And that's sort of what happens here. And that's sort of why foam tips end up kind of clearing the noise. Everything becomes a little bit less bright and sharper because now you can hear everything balanced the way it should be. So yeah, I don't know how they tuned it or why they tuned it in that way. I think the tuner probably used foam tips. There's something going on there, why they put that much energy out there, but it tended to bother me, and it sounds odd. So that's sort of kind of the cue that there's something going on. If it sounds really odd to you, then take a look at using foam tips or something else to take down that peak. And I'll also say it's not all that easy to drive. You got to pay really close attention to the recessed mids on this one and the clarity in the mids. It will definitely take more power and more volume than you think it will. So I kind of figured this out with this guy. So Topping G5. This guy actually has gain settings, high, medium, and low on the back. And I was just kind of playing around with it. And I had, up until this point, I had been using the G5 on low gain, because low gain is plenty of power. This thing is a powerful box. It's like 1.3 watts or something like that. So I had always used it on low with plenty of IMs, and it actually works fine. On this guy, not so much. You end up with really strange sounding mids. They're recessed, they're kind of muted and not as dynamic as they should be. And I was just playing around with the gain switch, and I just switched it to high. And then suddenly you hear the treble fall in place. It sounds very dynamic. Everything tightens up. It's exactly how people describe, adding more power to a dynamic driver. Everything gets really tight, sharp, treble falls in place, everything aligned. And I kind of figured out that it takes quite a bit more power and quite a bit more volume to really get to that point. So on this one, I started just switch it to high gain and then turn down the volume. It's a much easier to find the right spot where this one falls in balance, as opposed to starting with low and cranking it all the way to the right, to the point where you think you're at the right volume. It's just a lot quicker if you start high and work your way down low, and it's actually you don't have to turn it down that much, because it takes a lot of volume to kind of get it to the point where it really starts to shine and sound dynamic. So sound, I'll call that a balanced V. It's kind of that fun V. You can turn it up, and they tilted the treble down, so you can turn it up quite a bit. And again, when you look at it compared to Olina, so Shozy has kind of a bigger arc here, but then they really dip this out. And again, this part at lower volume is going to sound quite low and not as dynamic. So I think the graph all makes sense when you think about it, but in practice, when you take it out of the box before you graph it or even look at it, yeah, I wasn't expecting how much volume and power it would really take for it to sound in balance. And then if you don't have the foam tips and then this is really bothering you, you hear this first. So when I really took it out of the box and started playing with it, I was hearing this, and I was thinking it was too bright, and that brightness was kind of shifting here. So I wouldn't turn it up enough to where it sounded dynamic and in balance. I was just, getting fatigued because there was this big bump out there. So foam tips, pop that down, more volume, put this in place, balanced with the bass, 14.5 dynamic driver. Everything is very nice if you get everything to align and in the zone for how you like to listen to it. And I will sort of hesitate and say it took me a while to get all of this right, between the tips and the source, the volume, the power. You've got to be willing to work a little bit to get this one to sound right, to hear it at its best. It definitely was not an out-of-the-box, plug it into your phone and you were off and running. It's definitely not like that. Some people may do it, but for me, it took me quite a while to get it to the point where I was really enjoying it. So the bass, I kind of lost my voice there for a second, but boosted mid bass, like I said, and this driver really wears it well. I think they actually picked a really nice driver. It's a PET driver. They put a level that's even above Olina, but it doesn't really sound as bloated as you think it's going to. It actually has a lot of control to it. And then again, more power, more volume. It really stiffens up, and it sounds a lot more in control and defined. Buy it for the right reasons. It's not a boomer or a slammer or any other ER that you're thinking of. Fuller, I think, is the only one that kind of fits my mode on this one. It's got a really full full bass from sub bass all the way through mid bass, but the levels are not to the point where you're at bass head, banger, slammer. It's none of those. Even the impact isn't all that huge. There's a really slight tilt to it down in the sub bass, which I think is the right move. It does carry some warmth right into the mids, and you just really end up with really nice dynamic driver, leads right into natural mids for male vocals. I think they got all of that pretty much spot on. Where it really shines is the quality and sort of that tactile feel that you don't get on 10mm dynamic drivers. Those little thumps that you can feel on drums that are kind of missing on 10mm, they don't really do that well. Your brain tends to fill it in, but every once in a while it's nice to hear a big dynamic driver where your brain doesn't have to fill it in. It's there. You get a really nice sounding drum on a big dynamic driver like this. You just don't hear it all that often. There's very few 14.5mm dynamic drivers floating around, so I very much enjoyed the opportunity to hear it. Took a lot of work to get there, and I think there is some benefit to it, but again, it's not a drastic night and day. This thing blows away any other dynamic driver. Even Alina, it's kind of a difference. You're kind of looking for these small, subtle things. A lot of what I said about Simco's EA1000 applies here. Very subtle shift in quality that you can get on a driver like this that you might not hear on the one that you have for $30 or $50. But at $140, are you really willing to pay that much to hear such a subtle shift in quality? It's kind of there, but I'm not sure that a lot of people are going to invest that much money to hear such a small difference. But I will admit that the drums and all of AC/DC's Back in Black, very, very nice playback on a big dynamic driver. I think they kind of got that part very, very well. So the mids, with foams, lots of power, lots of volume, this DD can actually pull off some beautiful mids, especially on your acoustic greatest hits playlist. And that's kind of sort of where I was zoning. I think AC/DC is actually tons of fun, but longer session, I tended to go through acoustic music. And I think just the way it sits a little bit lower into lower mids, like I said, the way that the mid bass level they put on this one is a really full sounding bass, and you don't hear that every day. And it's sort of, that's what pulled me in, because I could hear high energy on lots and lots of other sets, but to hear kind of the lower mids rendered well on a big dynamic driver, nice and full, that's sort of what grabbed my attention on this set. And once you get rid of the upper frequency noise and the low power, those things tend to hide some of the subtleness in the mids, the decays and the textures and the dynamics, especially at lower volume. Those disappear quite quickly. But when you reveal them, there's some real price-worthy mids there. And you pair it with an equally nice source like a G5, and it's a really nice combination. But I will say it again, the lower volume goes recessed very quickly. You'll miss that detail and the resolution, and the point at which the treble adds definition to the mids, all of that falls away very quickly. It really transitions to just an okay set very quickly. And that's sort of, again, that was part of this annoyance of this set, was you have to get everything dialed in and aligned, and the moons and the sun have to be in the right places for this one to sound optimal. And I thought it's just too easy to push it off of its balance point, where you start losing some things that make this one stand out. And I thought that was just kind of annoying for the price point. But the treble, and again, starting from the upper mids, peaking at 8 dB, it's kind of a really nice level. It's not quite Harman energy levels, and then they proceeds to dip it. So then it's really not Harman style level. It's actually a very relaxed sounding level. But with the foams, it tends to sound a little bit brighter than a grass without the foams. I mean, same on the sibilants. They're just a little bit more sibilants. If you try to use the silicone tips that are included with it, it almost resonates this high frequency a bit, and you end up with a little bit more sharper edge and a little bit more sibilance. This dynamic driver does have an edge to it, and that extra energy wasn't all that helpful on the sharp S's. Silicone tips just didn't work for me on this set, period. They just emphasized all the wrong bits of it. But when you put foam on it, it's just one of those dynamic drivers that has those borderline sharp definition edges, almost like a balanced armature. it's just really another reason why the bass is tuned the way they did. And like I said, it's not a bass head, it's not a big level. It's a nice, clear quality, nice definition, right? There's nice clarity in the bass. All of that pairs exactly where the treble is as well, and the two work together. This isn't a sharp treble, fuzzy bass style set. This is kind of balanced at both ends, and I think they did that very well. Yeah, two sides match, so got all of that. Stage, and I won't talk too much about this one just because it ranged wildly from not good at all to very good. Foam tips, nice source that's right, nice and extended. You do get an immersive, big sound stage projected. All of the right things happen when the stars align and you get the tips and everything working. When it doesn't work, it ended up being, kind of wide, kind of recessed back, kind of short. Lots of things went wrong out of the box with this one on stage. So I won't. That one's really hard on this one because I know it's going to vary so wildly depending on how you pull it out of the box and put it in your ears. So that is what I got on the P20. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.